and I mentioned to you the position, I made special emphasis for the position of the medial head of the tricep there. Really, this medial head, at first when you start thinking about its name, you think, well, this head is going to sit right between the long head, which attaches to the infraglenoid tubule, and the lateral head. But really, the medial head is attached. It's medial in its name because you can see that most of the mass of this head, as it extends proximally, extends along the medial aspect of the humerus. So attaches to the tricep, to the olecranon, like the other extensors, like all the extensors. So whether we're talking about in the brachial region or the interbrachial region, if we say extensor, we think radial nerve. All right, so this shows you the position of the radial nerve here. It is posterior to the humerus, as we pointed out before. It does pass across the anterior aspect of the cubital fossa. Right in this area right here, it makes good sense. I'm going to show you this in the antebrachium. It makes good sense because this most lateral piece of muscle out here that many of you cut on your cats is the brachioradialis, which extends from the distal part of the humerus down to the styloid process of the radius. And that one, in fact, does get radial information, and it makes sense for the radius to be positioned here. All right, so that's the radial nerve then. It passes then back into the posterior cavity to pick up the extensors. All right, reminder again, the brachial plexus, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it. Now, we did say something about the radial nerve. I brought it up here today in the innervation of the tricep. And I said before to you as we were looking at this, y'all, you can't just memorize these things and leave it at that. So I talked a little bit about this being upper brachial plexus. Median picks up some upper, some lower. And then I went down here and I said axillary, you would think axillary gets posterior divisions. Posterior cord, all 5 spinal cord divisions. But that's not how it works. This guy's upper. So remember upper for axillary. That makes sense. The deltoid and the teres minor are the highest muscles we've been talking about. They're way up there, upper brachial plexus. Whereas the radial nerve, in fact, is arguably the most accurate depiction of what we mean when we say a plexus. All 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, all of these divisions of the cord, the brachial plexus, feed through the posterior division to feed the radial nerve. Lots and lots to do for this radial nerve. And when I say radial, you think extension. You think tricep extension, and then all these extensors on the antebrachium that I'm going to show you today. All right, before we leave that, let's pick up a few others that we haven't seen. I mentioned the coracobrachialis to you very briefly last time, from the coracoid process to the brachium. Now this one gets musculocutaneous. So if I say radial, then you think posterior, passing anterior through the cubital fossa to pick up brachioradialis, posterior again for extension. Extension, extension, extension. If I say musculocutaneous, then you think flexion, flexion, flexion. So we picked this one up before when we were talking about the bicep brachii, which attaches to the radial tuberosity. The long head passes to the rim of the glenoid cavity. The short head goes here to the coracoid process. Now, I like to ask questions like this. Shared attachments, right? On your lab test, this will be a question right here. This will be a question on your lecture test. Important things that go to the coracoid process. For example, you have seen that there's a very important ligament extending off the clavicle that goes to the coracoid process. We call it the coracoclavicular ligament. This guy helps to suspend the upper arm. That's an important attachment up to the clavicle. We have seen the coracoid process an attachment for the short head of the bicep. That's where flexion happens at the elbow. We will see today the attachment to the coracoid process of the pectoralis minor, which is a very important anatomical landmark. The pectoralis minor, just deep to the major, which I made emphasis to you in the laboratory. Every time I show a student in the lab the pectoralis major, I say, look at the difference in the minor. Touch the coracoid process. Don't forget. And then this one, the coracobrachialis, which does flexion as well. But this one does flexion at the shoulder. So I say musculocutaneous, you think flexion. Flexion, coracobrachialis. Flexion, bicep brachii. And brachialis, all musculocutaneous. Where is this nerve? This nerve passes along the anterior side of the brachium. Gets to the cubital fossa, and where does it go? Out lateral. Does it pick up any motor stuff, any muscles out there? No, it does not. It's all sensory once it passes lateral, past the elbow. Musculocutaneous, flexion, flexion, flexion. Coracobrachialis, bicep brachii, brachialis. These are all musculocutaneous innervated muscles. Flexion, flexion, flexion. The coracobrachialis. All right, here's the pectoralis major. This one has a clavicle attachment. A lot of stuff there, yes? We started the clavicle by attaching the trapezius to it. Remember that? The big muscle in the back. And then when I got to the shoulder, I put the deltoid on there. And now I'm in the chest, and I'm putting the pectoralis major there. So everything, y'all, all of the flesh here, across here, and all across the back here, all of that flesh attaches to the clavicle. Pectoralis major is not unique here. The trapezius attaches there, as does the deltoid. Major muscles of the flesh of the body go to the clavicle here in the upper regions. The sternum and the costal cartilages of the ribs, 1 to 6, and the aponeurosis of the external oblique. The aponeurosis of the external oblique. I'm going to give you some learning tools for that today. How to remember the attachments of these obliques. And then it attaches near the intertubercular groove. That's a test question. Near the intertubercular groove. What all goes there? Well, let me think. The long head of the bicep passes through the intertubercular groove, right? It is stapled in there by the transverse humeral retinaculum that goes from the greater to the lesser tubercle. Staples that tendon in there. Now we saw the latissimus dorsi there, near the intertubercular groove. We saw the teres major there, near the intertubercular groove. And now we see the pectoralis major there, near the intertubercular groove. It's a really important place on the proximal end of the humerus, the pectoralis major. Innervation. The pectoralis minor, it's coming, that's just a setup. Pectoralis minor attaches to the ribs 3, 4, and 5, and we mentioned this before. The minor on your cat looks a little different than this. Now this attachment to the coracoid process does not look different. Y'all, what is this muscle right here? What's this muscle right here? Okay. Yeah, so at first glance you think, well, that is the coracobrachialis. But the coracobrachialis, let's go back and look at it. The coracobrachialis was shown on this picture. And you can see that it has a more proximal attachment to the humerus. So where is this picture in relation to this one?
Deeper.
It's deeper. Do y'all see that? Okay, so what is that muscle then?
Bicep.
That's the bicep brachii attaching to the coracoid process. What is this bone right here? Clavicle. And what is that ligament right there? The coracoclavicular ligament. Yeah. And so here's your pectoralis minor and its attachment to the coracoid process. Now in the cat, as I said, this thing comes more superficial, but not in humans. It's all deep to the pectoralis major. And these two muscles get the medial and lateral pectorals, which I had pointed out to you before. The names are quite helpful here. You won't have to memorize this. If it goes to the pectoralis major and minor, it's named pectoral. And then all you have to do is remember lateral and medial. And what do the lateral and medials refer to? Cords. They refer to the cords, the lateral medial cords, both the pectoralis muscles, the major and minor. All right, good. Here's the brachialis that I've mentioned on a couple of occasions. The brachialis is deep to the bicep. So the bicep attaches to the rim of the glenoid cavity in the coracoid process. The brachialis, and then the bicep comes down here and attaches to the radial tuberosity. So the big muscle that does flexion here, which gets musculocutaneous, comes down the arm, and it has a lateral attachment, right? The radius is lateral. Now, where is the radial tuberosity on the radius? Is it on the inside, medial, or is it on the outside, lateral? It's on this side. It's on the ulna side, and it's anterior. So the major flexor muscle here in your arm pulls from the radial tuberosity. Musculocutaneous does flexion from the radial tuberosity to the coracoid and the rim of the glenoid cavity. Take the bicep off. Underneath it is the brachialis. Now, it doesn't work like that in your cat, does it? The bicep is a single-headed muscle, and the brachialis is lateral to the bicep. I'm sorry, it's there. They have the same attachments, but the arrangement is a little bit different. So bicep, underneath it, brachialis. Now, here's the difference. There are two bones here, the radius and the ulna. The bicep goes to the radius. The brachialis goes to the ulna. So when you do flexion, do you pull on both bones? Yeah. The bicep pulls on the radius, the brachialis pulls on the ulna. So this one is attached, as you can see here, to the coronoid process of the ulna. And is this surprising now? Are you starting to get these things, these themes? The brachialis does flexion in the arm, flexion, flexion, flexion. It gets the musculocutaneous. All right, now, at this point, things get really nasty as we start to get into the details of these. Here's the thing. I would like for you to take some things with you from me. So I would like for at some point in your life for you to learn the brachial plexus, and you start hearing these nerves and you go, I remember the gray-haired man from anatomy, and he said, extension, 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 radial. And I remember those nerves that pass through the elbow. And then I remember musculocutaneous, flexion, flexion, flexion. And so these things you won't forget. And so I'd like to give you some things you won't forget. In order to do that, I believe, so people disagree with me on this, but I believe people do not remember things like the pronator the flexor carpi radialis attaches to metacarpals 2 and 3. And the flexor carpi ulnaris attaches to the pisiform, hamate, and metacarpal 5. So I'm going to tell you this. It's probably not a good teacher thing to say, but I'm not going to ask you those questions. They're here, typed for you to see the attachments, but that's not what I'm going to ask you. Here's what I'm going to ask you. Things that I hope you remember. So the first thing is the order of the muscles from lateral to medial or medial to lateral. If I'm looking at the arm of the cat, I'm looking at the arm of the human, I should be able to name the muscles as I go across. And I did this with you in the lab. Find the landmarks. There's the palmaris longus, there's the pronator, there's the brachioradialis. Now I have context. Name them as you go across. So this is the order then. Brachioradialis, pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, flexor carpi ulnaris. That's them right there. That's the ones across to the ulnaris. Those are your superficial muscles that you have to know in the cat. And there are their attachments. Now, I'm going to ask you the order. Lateral to medial or medial to lateral. You should learn them that way. You have to know them that way in the cat as well. And here's the attachment thing I'd like for you to remember. First, I'd like for you to know that if you do flexion at the wrist, you're going to attach to the medial epicondyle. Flexion comes from the medial epicondyle. So there it is. You see it? Medial epicondyle, medial epicondyle, medial epicondyle, medial epicondyle. So if I want to do flexion, I'm coming from the medial epicondyle. Know the order, lateral to medial, and flexion comes from the medial epicondyle. Now, if I say flexion, and I'm talking about shoulder and elbow, I think musculocutaneous. If I say flexion at the wrist, there are 3 nerves to learn. Now, if you remember flexion as a median nerve function, you're probably good. But you also need to know that the most lateral of these, the brachioradialis, gets the radial nerve. I thought radial was all extension. Yes? So it's on the border, y'all. It's way out here on the styloid process. So is that flexion? Okay. Brachioradialis gets radial, so that's an unusual one. And then look, the pronator gets median, the flexor carpi radialis gets median, the palmaris longus gets median, and then the flexor carpi ulnaris gets ulnar. Now I don't have a problem remembering that because it's named for the bone and the nerve. So you can remember the flexor carpi ulnaris is innervated by the ulnar. Now that is an oversimplification because it has 2 heads, and I'm not going to do that either to you. So radial the most lateral, ulnar the most medial, but the ones in between, the ones that we think of, the big ones that's doing flexion, are median. So radial, median, 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 ulnar. This is how you innervate the muscles of the antebrachium. Where does flexion come from? The medial epicondyle. Can you name the muscles as you move across the arm? All right, and the last thing is, the one muscle in the middle that serves as a landmark is an important one, and I taught you pronation. Now, this is also unfortunate because this is not the primary pronator. There's another one that I'm going to show you in just a moment that is the primary pronator, but this one has it in its name, as the other one does. And I would like you to know its attachment. It's a special little muscle, and here's why. Because unlike your cat, most of them have a pronator that sits in the middle of this mass that is an easy landmark because it's shorter. Yours is long, yeah? The pronator should be short. And so if I look lateral, I see brachioradialis. And then if I look medial, I see palmaris longus. And so, because it's a big flat thing. And then I can label the muscles in between easy like that. And then I should be able to see the pronator in between them because it's a short muscle. So I want you to know its specific attachments. It is attached, no change here, to the medial epicondyle of the humerus, but then it has an attachment to the coronoid of the ulna and mid-shaft radius. So it goes from the medial epicondyle, crosses this way. The pronator should be a short muscle. So if I know my anatomy, I don't really have to memorize it if I just do pronator like this. Because if it's on the medial epicondyle, it's going to go right across the top of the coronoid of the ulna. And there it attaches out on the mid-shaft radius. So when it contracts, watch, it pronates the thumb, hence its name, the round pronator, the pronator teres. All right, now down here on the bottom I have superficialis. So I'm going to show you this muscle and a couple of others just to sufficiently freak you out. Again, let's be careful about bogging ourselves down with details. Now, this one, oh, I wanted to do one more. Before we do the flexor digitorum superficialis, this picture's not in your book. But it's a very famous anatomical thing, and I don't know why the book doesn't at least mention it to you. One thing is this shows you that I am not even touching the level of complexity of muscles that are here in the forearm and hand. There's so much more to be said. My job is to give you an introduction, and so that's what I'm doing. But what I want to show you here is, if you will all just look at your hand for just a moment. So there's several things that you can do with your thumb. All right, so if the thumb is like this, we say in joint terms, it is adducted. Now, does that make sense? So to adduct, to bring it to the body, yeah? So in this case, to bring the thumb in, it's adducted. Now, which way would I go with my thumb to abduct the thumb? Okay, so that's what you might think, right? But in fact, this motion right here is abduction for the thumb. So if this is a deduction, this is abduction. Now, what would this be then? Extension. So this is extension, adduction, abduction. What would you call this? I'll give you this one. The all famous opposable thumb. Yes? This is opposition for the thumb. Okay, how about this for the fingers? My hands are like this. So are my fingers abducted or deducted? Deducted. Why do you say that? They're all together. Yeah, you've added them together. What is this? A deduction. Yeah? Sorry, a abduction. You said it right. A abduction, a deduction. Now there have got to be muscles that do this. Yes? Okay, so you're looking at your thumb with me. Now, I look at my thumb and I extend it. I extend my thumb. You can feel a tendon right here. Y'all feel that tendon? And you can also feel, if you push just slightly, what's that? Just slightly medial to that tendon, you can feel there's a little cavity right there. Can y'all feel that cavity? That cavity is a famous anatomical location. It's called the anatomical snuff box. The snuff box, that's what it's called. And I never like to let students get away from me from at least seeing it. It's a famous spot because, as you can see here, the radial artery's in there. That's an important anatomical spot in your body. So the radial artery passes down the lateral aspect of the arm, and then as it turns to go out to the hand, it passes through that little snuff box. So that's an important spot. And as you can see, I've shown you the borders of this thing, and now you'll recognize their names. They are, so the thumb is called the pollex, right? So this is the extensor pollicis longus. The extensor pollicis longus, all right? So I'm going to have a longus and I'm going to have a brevis. The box, the snuff box, is right in the middle of them. The tendons of the pollicis and the tendons of the longus and the brevis there. Now, if a tendon is going to go a long way, if it is going to go a long way from the thumb is on the lateral side, right? I'm going to take it all the way over to the ulna. If it's only going to go a short distance, brevis, I'm going to end it on the radius. These are the two muscles that make the snuff box where the radial artery is. So that's all I want you to take with that. This guy gets radial, which is no surprise to you. It's on the extensor side. So the extensor pollicis longus and extensor pollicis brevis make the borders of the snuff box. Why is it important? Radial artery's in there. You can locate that on your hand. All right, now, let's go deep on the forearm. This picture has a couple things I want to say about it. I don't want to beat you up with the horrific details, but there's a little bit of clinical interest here. Let me see if I can get your attention. This is a transverse section of the hand at the wrist, and you can see here I've labeled bones for you, the scaphoid and the trapezium on this side, the thumb side, and the pisiform and the hamate on this side. And there's a ligament here that passes across from the pisiform hamate to the scaphoid trapezium, called the transverse carpal ligament. It creates, between that ligament and the carpal bones, it creates a tunnel. And in that tunnel you find some very famous tendons and nerves. There are actually 3 muscles. So 8 of the tendons are the superficialis profundus, and then 1 tendon of a single muscle over here passing through there, and a nerve, the median nerve. So this is the all famous carpal tunnel. You got carpal tunnel syndrome? What is in, here's the point, what is in there? What's in that carpal tunnel? Why are people having trouble here? What is the problem in here? What is going on? All right, so I want you to know, I want you to take away from anatomy what's in the snuff box and what's in the tunnel. What are the borders of the snuff box and what's in the carpal tunnel? Okay, so here's what's in there. So first, the flexor digitorum superficialis. Now this is what I meant when I told you in your cat, there's a bunch of muscles there that don't have names. And you guys are looking at all these extra muscles, right? And you're thinking, what is that? Okay, well now, today you're learning what they are. The superficialis group, as you can see labeled here, attaches to the medial epicondyle. Is that surprising? No, everything flexion does medial epicondyle. And then, all of these guys, 4 of them, 2, 3, 4, 5, they all pass through the carpal tunnel, as you can see them passing through here, to attach to the middle phalanx. All right, so if I'm going deep here, I've pulled off. I've pulled off now and gotten out of the way the brachioradialis, the flexor carpi radialis, the pronator teres, the palmaris longus. They're all gone. And underneath that is a muscle that attaches to the medial epicondyle with all the rest of them. And it goes down through the carpal tunnel to these fingers, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You think that muscle's important for flexion of the fingers? Well, yeah, it's attached here on the middle phalanx of those 4. And it gets median nerve innervation. And the median nerve is in the tunnel with the tendons. Okay? The next one down is the profundus. And it's a little deeper. And so its proximal attachment is over on the coronoid process. It goes all the way down to the distal phalanx. So the deeper one goes further. So you tell me. This is superficial and this is deep.